A small marsh lay between our army and the enemy's. The enemy expected us to cross this marsh, while we were prepared to attack if they started to cross it first. Meanwhile, cavalry skirmishes continued between the two lines. When neither side initiated crossing and our cavalry had a successful engagement, Caesar withdrew his troops to the camp. The enemy immediately moved from that position towards the river Axona, which was behind our camp. Finding a ford, they attempted to cross part of their forces, aiming to attack the fort guarded by Legate Quintus Titurius and destroy the bridge, or, if they failed, to ravage the fields of the Remi, which were crucial for our supplies, and cut off our provisions. Upon receiving this information from Titurius, Caesar led all his cavalry, Numidian light infantry, slingers, and archers across the bridge and marched to confront the enemy. The fighting at that location was fierce. Our troops attacked the enemy as they were crossing the river, killing many of them, and repelled the rest who attempted to cross with a barrage of missiles. Those who had already crossed were surrounded and killed by our cavalry. When the enemy realized they had failed both to capture the fort and to cross the river, and they saw that our troops were not advancing into an unfavorable position, and their food supply was dwindling, they held a council and decided that the best course of action was for each man to return home and that they should converge to defend those territories first entered by the Romans, preferring to fight on their own lands and use their domestic supplies. This decision was also influenced by the fact that they had learned Diviciacus and the Aedui were approaching the Bellovices territory, and they could not persuade their allies to stay and provide help. After making this decision, they left their camp during the second watch with great noise and disorder, moving without any specific order or command, each man seeking to be the first on the road and hurrying home, making their departure appear like a flight. Caesar, learning this from his scouts, fearing an ambush since he did not yet understand the reason for their departure, kept his army and cavalry in camp. At first light, once confirmed by scouts, he sent all his cavalry to delay the enemy's rear guard, led by legates Quintus Pedius and Lucius Aurunculeius Cotta. He ordered legate Titus Labienus to follow with 3 legions. These forces attacked the rear guard and pursued them for many miles, killing a large number of the fleeing enemy. Those at the rear bravely resisted our soldiers' attacks, but the front ranks, seeing themselves out of danger and bound by neither necessity nor command, broke ranks upon hearing the cries, and all took flight for safety. Thus, without any risk, our soldiers killed as many of the enemy as the length of the day allowed, and at sunset, stopped their pursuit and returned to camp as ordered. The next day, before the enemy could recover from their fear and flight, Caesar led his army into the territory of the Susians, who were nearest to the Remi, and marched rapidly to the town of Noviodunum. Attempting to take it by surprise as he had heard it was undefended, he found that the wide ditch and high walls, though defended by few, prevented its capture. After fortifying his camp, he began to build mantlets and prepare other siege equipment. Meanwhile, the entire force of the Susians, having fled from the previous battle, gathered in the town during the night. Quickly, Caesar brought the siege works close to the town, built a mound, and set up towers. The sheer magnitude of these operations, which the Gauls had neither seen nor heard of before, and the speed of the Romans, prompted the Susians to send envoys to Caesar to discuss surrender, and, at the Remi's request, they were granted protection. After receiving hostages, including the leading men of the state and the 2 sons of King Galba, and all the weapons from the town, Caesar accepted the surrender of the Susians and led his army into the territory of the Bellovici. When the Bellovici had taken themselves and all their belongings into the town of Radispantium, and Caesar was about 5 miles from the town with his army, all the elders came out from the town, stretching out their hands to Caesar and signaling with their voices that they were coming into his protection and power, and that they would not fight against the Roman people. Likewise, when he approached the town and set up camp there, the boys and women, from the walls with outstretched hands in their customary manner, begged the Romans for peace. Diviciacus spoke on their behalf, for after the departure of the Belgae, he had dismissed the Aeduan forces and returned to Caesar. The Bellovici had always been loyal and friendly to the Aeduan state. They had been driven to this by their leaders, who said that the Aedui had been reduced to servitude by Caesar, were enduring all sorts of indignities and insults, had defected from the Aedui, and had waged war against the Roman people. Those leaders who were the instigators of this plan, realizing the great calamity they had brought upon their state, had fled to Britain. The Bellovici, not only on their own behalf, but also on behalf of the Aedui, were requesting that Caesar exercise his customary clemency and mildness toward them. If he did so, he would greatly enhance the Aedui's authority among all the Belgae, who, with their assistance and resources, had been accustomed to sustaining any wars that arose. Caesar, for the sake of Diviciacus and the Aedui, said he would receive the Bellovaci into his protection and spare them. Because this state was great among the Belga in authority and number of men, he demanded 600 hostages. After they were handed over and all the weapons were collected from the town, he advanced from that place into the territory of the Ambiani, who immediately surrendered themselves and all their possessions. Their territory bordered on that of the Nervi. When Caesar inquired about the nature and customs of the Nervi, he learned the following. They allowed no merchants into their territory, and permitted no wine or other luxury goods to be imported, believing that such things weakened their resolve and diminished their valor. They were fierce men of great courage. They reproached and accused the other Belgae, who had surrendered to the Roman people and abandoned their ancestral valor, declaring that they themselves would neither send envoys nor accept any conditions of peace. After marching through their territory for 3 days, Caesar learned from prisoners that the river Savus was only about 10 miles from his camp. Across this river, all the Nervi had gathered and were awaiting the arrival of the Romans, along with the Atrebates and Viromandui, their neighbors, for they had persuaded both of these tribes to share the same fate in war. They were also expecting the forces of the Achuatusi, who were on their way, and they had sent their women and all who were too old to fight to a place where, because of the marshes, the Roman army would have no access. After learning these things, Caesar sent ahead scouts and centurions to choose a suitable place for a camp. As several of the Belga who had surrendered and other Gauls were traveling with Caesar, some of them, as was later learned from prisoners, went to the Nervi by night and reported the daily route of the Roman army. They explained that a great number of baggage trains separated the legions, and that there would be no difficulty in attacking the first legion when it arrived in camp and was burdened with its packs, driving it off and plundering its baggage. They predicted that, with this legion driven off, the others would not dare to resist. This plan was also aided by the fact that the Nervi, being unable to use cavalry effectively, as they did not train for it and relied entirely on their infantry, had created a barrier by cutting and bending young trees and intertwining their branches, along with brambles and thorns, to form a hedge that provided a fortification like a wall, making it impossible to enter and even difficult to see through. With these obstacles, they intended to hinder the Roman column's march and saw no reason to abandon their plan.